Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABM Answered, the quickfire Demand Gen and ABM video series. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Erika Smith for somewhat, I guess, our annual catch-up, who is an ABM consultant for environmental companies because she has a heart. So I don't know if you want to build on that, and I'm particularly interested in like the environmental company side of things. If you, expand on that.
Absolutely. I think it was literally like exactly a year ago because I think we were talking about the transfer window last time, right? So I think it's about a year. So I was just joining ABM agency based here in London. It's been great. We put a lot of emphasis sort of on that value proposition and strategy because effectively, if you don't have that right and you're building all of your content, all of your ads off of it, it's not going to perform as well as it can. So very much starting kind of from the beginning is, our bread and butter. So that's where I've been. And then I also wear another hat, as you mentioned. So I like to work with sustainability focused companies, kind of to introduce ABM to them, sort of consult them, because if the whole idea of ABM is landing your biggest key accounts, sort of, I just think the best way for me to contribute potentially to net zero is if I can get these great companies doing great things, kind of landing your big enterprises. That's a big way to kind of make that impact. So yeah, thank you for the intro.
No, thank you for taking the time out to do this. So to run you again through the rules and the viewers, Erika, in this case, will be given 7 questions, maybe 8, because I've been a bit cheeky, to respond to all about ABM and Demand Gen. The questions have come from or been adapted based on the data we've collected at mixed reality rooms, where 1,000 marketers have gone through and stated basically what their biggest headaches are with Demand Gen and ABM at the moment. So, Erika, you ready to rock and roll?
Let's do it.
Right. So headache 1, problem 1, challenge 1, whatever you want to call it. Crafting a differentiated value proposition. So the question would be, I presume, like, how do you ensure that your value proposition stands out in a crowded market, especially when targeting key accounts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Because I think that's, again, talking about starting from the beginning, you have to get that right. Value proposition is fundamentally something you have to get right. I mean, there's a lot of different factors that go into it because I think there's a lot of different truths in what your company does. So it can be sort of one, of course, it has to be kind of customer centric. So you have to put their pain points, what they want at the center of it. Otherwise, you're delivering something to someone that doesn't have the need. It's not going to land. So I would say one, definitely pulling that customer bit in first. I think the second piece is also looking at kind of your salespeople. So what they're hearing from their clients already, what they're, how they're pitching in market. They are the ones, like, they're the boots on the ground. They can give you a reality check in terms of what works, what doesn't. So sort of capturing that as well. So it requires a high level of coordination with your sales team. The third thing is sort of, I guess, the truth, which is effectively, what are you actually building? So if we're talking about tech, what features do you have? If you're selling physical things, like, what does it actually do? What is the thing that comes out of the factory, if you will? So I think mixing all of this, and of course you then have to check, are other competitors saying the same thing? And I think we forget to do that a lot. But if you look at a lot of perhaps value prop marketing out there around the similar industries, a lot of companies just say the same thing, use a lot of words that don't mean much. Quite abstract. So kind of looking at that, if you're saying the same thing as someone else, then it's not a differentiated value proposition. So I think it's looking at, so those first 3 pieces, customer, your salespeople, what they're saying, also your product, but then continuing to check against your competitors. If you sort of set up that feedback loop, and again, I don't think it's like you create a value proposition and it's static, that's it. You want to be iterating and evolving as you get these feedbacks from market, but also like as you see kind of your competitors and market moving in a certain direction as well.
The way you broke the answer down, phenomenal. This is exactly how we need it. Another thing, on the competitors thing, it's interesting. So it depends, I guess, how revolutionary you are. But I've always found like you can overswing or overswing, I would say, where it's like your competitors is probably saying these things because it is resonating. So how bold are you when it comes to? I get the boots on the ground, the sales team, they're the ones that understand it more. But like, how can you differentiate too much, I guess, like
Yeah,
by trying to be too different?
I think you can. So, a value proposition, I do believe it is like an internal piece. So, if you're building, whether it is sort of that sales kind of motion or content, you sort of want to double check that it's based off the value prop, right? It's not supposed to be an external facing thing. So I think is even though you want to be ambitious, especially if your company's vision is ambitious, going back to let's say net zero, for example, if your company vision is like we want to be this specific product that enables the top 100 companies to go net zero, like that is a huge company vision, but you could argue, okay, that's the direction they're headed in, and you kind of need that. But when you start to kind of then distill down to a value prop, yes, it still needs to be ambitious because that could be differentiating. But if it's not marrying up to sort of at the very minimum, like your tech roadmap, for example, like is that something that's being discussed? Are the things coming out? Does it kind of align to that vision? If it's yes, then I would say probably you can keep it in because you obviously don't want to be like, this is what we do and that's all we do. You want to then kind of sell that, be with us to kind of be part of the future kind of proposition to your customers as well. But it's sort of that reality check of, is that even what you do? If it's not, then like to your point, then you're just lying.
Yeah,
If it's something that you feel like it's not true or you can fall down on it, then it's wrong. I would say as long as it's aligned to where your company's headed, again, talking about tech, like the tech roadmap, new features being rolled out, if it is kind of congruent with that, then I say, go big. But again, to your point, is it a lie? Is it not? Is sort of, I guess it becomes a simple question, but it's also a hard one to answer as well.
I think it's super hard. I think it's probably one of the most difficult things, isn't it? Because that like kind of shapes the whole company. I've realized I've got so many follow-on questions, like kind of different stages, competitors copying you, but
Mm-hmm.
we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to go straight into kind of quick fire. Problem
Yeah.
two: personalization at scale. So question two would be, what strategies do you use to kind of develop highly personalized content for your
Mm-hmm.
multiple target accounts? Without trying to like compromise on efficiency, if that even is the
Mm-hmm.
right word to use here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to potentially sound like a broken record because I always like to go to the first step, which is sort of that whole at scale thing implies that you've done something really, really well at a
Mm-hmm.
one to one that you're now like, okay, this formula works. Let's kind of spread it. I think a lot of the times it's sort of you want to start at the at scale bit, which is basically you're potentially doing more of what doesn't work, which just gets you more of things that doesn't work. So I think the first point is if you're like, specific company, you converted them, you had a, great feedback, everything kind of went well, or you iterated and you kind of got to a point where you were like, okay, this motion works well at a one to one or maybe one to few. Then I think identify what part did you personalize? Was it because presumably it's probably not going to be hi insert first name or your role as insert job title. That's usually not what works. So it might be a specific pain point. It might be how you illustrated it. Was it a video? What type of what kind of journey did they have? Was it a multi-touch? Was it sort of very at the first the same salesperson throughout? It could be whatever that might have been. I think just you have to identify what was the personalization factor that actually worked before you can really talk about scaling it.
Very
Otherwise,
totally valid.
yeah, I just think you're just going to doing more of things that kind of worked and hoping for the best. So I would say just kind of going up like notch by notch
Mm-hmm.
would be
And then
kind of, yeah, the way I would approach it.
I promise no more follow-on questions, even if I'm dying to. Challenge three: aligning content with strategy with account needs. So,
Mhm.
how do you ensure that the content developed is perfectly aligned with the specific pain points? We kind of somewhat touched on it
Yeah.
earlier for each target account. And then question from Brandon Ali Aliasog Alisoglu. I struggle with this surname. How do you determine the right amount of content to give the sales team? Sometimes
Right.
too much, they're not going to pay attention. Too little, it's just not going to be helpful.
Yeah. So, yeah, so I love this question because it also kind of touches, I think, on a big part of which is kind of that wider question of how do you work with sales teams to make ABM
Mm-hmm.
work? Because even as a marketer, I hate to admit it, but it's sort of in this motion, kind of your sales team are like your biggest clients effectively. Because if they're not bought, then the content you create or the strategy you create is just not going to see the light of day or get the results that you want. So content is a big piece because, again, if you're tapping into the salespeople, they can give you the answers of, oh, this is like looking at the types of emails that salespeople send. I think that's always a great place to start because you can create a lot of content off of like your star salesperson, and they usually have like, they have whether it's a template or some sort of cadence that works, topics that work. Just creating that into a formalized asset that I see as a quick win. Because one, it's something that's obviously has worked in market. It's aligned with how the salespeople want to then take the account down the funnel. Because again, if you're doing something quite separate and you're like, okay, here's a MQL or MQA, and the salespeople are like, this is not how I want to deal with this. This is, you've talked about this. We don't, that's not what we want to focus on. That you have kind of a broken system. So working backwards from one, a quick win, just taking what they're saying and formalizing that. They usually want that because it already supports what they're doing. And then I think working sort of hand in hand to be like, what are the blockers that, you're struggling to address? What do you wish you had? What are you creating on the fly? Again, I think you'd be surprised to see like how many, like a PowerPoint is technically content.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those that the salespeople have to create like time and time again, just almost automating that for them. So I think there's a lot of ways that content for them is solving their problem that they've raised their hands for. It doesn't necessarily have to be, we've created this cool thing, we want you to use it. They probably won't use it. But as long as you're working backwards from their needs, then, they should really be happy to receive it.
For sure. What I quite like that is you're giving the sales team their Taylor Swift main character moment. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's probably something in that, like creating a product that allows you to, like, I don't know, you've seen like Gary Vee or things like that. It's like you're going to have like your own minion follow you around with
Hmm.
turn you into like a content powerhouse.
Yeah.
Anyway, problem 4: measuring the impact of the strategic content. So this question was from Matt Laban, and
Hmm.
he is a founder of Rocky. So he also is a B2B marketing consultant. Rocky is really smart because it kind of, I don't know if sentiment analysis is the right word, but it gives feedback on like blogs. So it like pops up and it's like,
Hmm.
what did you like about this blog? So they
Right.
actually understand what content is resonating well. So
Hmm.
obviously he's got like a underlying like motive with this one. But how do you measure the effectiveness of like your content in driving engagement for those kind of key accounts?
Yeah. So I think one, I guess it would depend on like what is your definition of effectiveness? Because if we're talking about diversifying content, you have content from things that are arguably, and again, I'm not saying this is the right approach or the wrong approach, but you have content that's meant to, drive clicks and traffic to a certain page that you might put on a LinkedIn ad.
Mm-hmm.
Is the effectiveness, what kind of traffic you got? Arguably, maybe at that stage. But then you sort of have 10 marketers in a room and ask them to create content that would achieve that. You might get some which are clickbait, but it achieves that, right? Like, is that the best type of content at that stage? That's questionable. So you sort of down the funnel, you get, again, like talking about sales, they're like, oh, it's really hard to get a second meeting with this type of persona. We can say, okay, maybe because they have questions around this that we're not addressing, here's a piece of content or video that can help you do that. And we get more kind of qualified like sales leads down the funnel at that point. That could be effective. You can have like onboarding. I think ABM, extends into onboarding and customer satisfaction as well. So if you
Yeah.
have good piece of the content there, making onboarding super easy for them, it could get someone to take an action on your platform, let's say within the first 24 hours or whatever your metric might be. And for them to take that action, if your content helps uplift that, then you could say that's an effective piece of content. So I think it's hard to say like it's probably too broad to be like this content is good for this ABM campaign because every content has like a stage in which it should be deployed, a target, account or
Mm-hmm.
target audience persona for that piece of content. So I would kind of approach it like that way and then kind of make specific KPIs per that content. And then maybe you can widen it to, okay, that means we need to achieve XYZ as a mix.
Note to self: ask better questions, more specific questions. You're right. Challenge 5: adapting strategy in real time. ABM's running, like you're getting feedback. We just mentioned like you're tracking metrics.
Mhm.
Maybe intent data comes a part of it.
Yeah.
What indicate what why? I guess to boil it down to an easy question: why would you change for one, and two, like how do you change,
Yeah.
like on the fly?
So so yes, I know, there's people out there that are way better than me in terms of that optimization of digital and all of that. So I'm going to be speaking more from that strategy perspective. I think definitely one, you need to have that feedback loop set up with your salespeople because usually something goes wrong or something's not resonating unless you've kind of almost set up like an SLA with your sales team or you have a meeting in the calendar, they're probably not going to take time out of their, already super busy schedule to be like, hey, marketer, by the way, this is not resonating or we haven't gotten feedback on this. That's kind of bottom of their list, as it should be. So when we find out at the end of it, like, oh, this didn't really work or that worked, it's like very old news at that point. So I think
Mm-hmm.
just speeding up that feedback loops, you can react when salespeople go, actually, this isn't working, or this is great. Like everyone loves this content, in which case we can jump on it and say, let's make a video of that. Let's make that into a one pager, all these different things that we can do. But we're just burning time by not having these conversations. So definitely setting up this like SLA with sales. I would say minimum once every 2 weeks. Have even half hour in the calendar, which can just be, just get to the point of tell me what's working, tell me what's not working, and let's kind of build like a sprint in terms of how to fix that.
That's what I was going to ask, the cadence, but okay, 1 to 2
Mhm.
weeks is a good flow. Problem 6: gaining buy-in from internal stakeholders. So more throwing the question back at you, what
Yeah.
challenges do you face in kind of like securing buy-in from sales, as we just mentioned,
Mhm.
internal stakeholders for your ABM strategies, and how do
Yeah.
you kind of like overcome them?
Yeah. So I think so this, I mean, this probably ties into like a wider marketing question, which is like, we always had the question of, well, what was the revenue uplift from your activity, right? Like that's what finance or whoever commercial
Yeah.
wants to know. It always comes down to that. And then attribution is very difficult. You sort of sometimes just have to say, well, you have to believe me when I say it definitely helped. That doesn't fly. So I think one, for sure, if you're sitting really closely with the sales team, it's a much easier pitch to be like, we're working in tandem with sales, like this deal that happened. These are all the different types of touch points we created. These are
Mm-hmm.
all the things we worked with sales in terms of like prepping for the meeting. You can sit much closer to that hard cash, if you will. So I think that's one thing. And once people see kind of that revenue has come from this activity, it's just easier across the board. So I would say do that almost quite strategically. And then I think the second point is there are wider teams, like for example, product might have to get involved with ABM because you want to talk about, well, how do we mature this conversation around this piece of tech? You need product in there again to align it with roadmap, et cetera. So that point we discussed earlier about how big is kind of potentially too ambitious for a value prop. It needs to be aligned with the roadmap. Obviously, those guys maybe don't care as much about revenue. So I think showing quick wins. So whether that's something like they're like, oh, no one's using these features, we want them to use that feature in this platform because that's when people see the most value. We can say, okay, we'll make sure that that is stressed in onboarding comms. We'll train them as part of that conversation. We'll definitely pitch that like way up front before people even buy as a potential benefit and sort of kind of highlight all the really, really cool things that they're doing in product. So I do think buy-in is a lot about genuinely listening to them and then bringing pretty quick results, whether that's big or small. Because
Sitting close to the
unless
money.
you got to do it, and I think marketing sometimes we have a bad rap of people just think all we do is just like make TikToks and talk about what color the button should be. And there's more to that. So I think if we can strategically sit closer to the money, it just makes our conversation easier. But of course, beyond that, we have to show that we're aligned to each team's kind of objectives and deliver on that.
For sure. I think it's a solid answer. So problem 7:
Hmm.
balancing short-term wins with long-term relationship building.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm all about trying the long game now. Like the short game, just don't think works
Yeah.
at all. But obviously, like you said, you got finance coming down on you. How do you balance kind of like the need for immediate results with the long-term relationship play with
Yeah.
target accounts specifically?
Yeah, for sure. Because definitely, I think as part of selling ABM in, you have to set that expectation that it is a long game, right? When if people are expecting something in 4 weeks or whatever, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. So that education is very important. Um, that being said, I think there is definitely a way, like a long-term gain is just a collective of a bunch of short-term gains, unless there's some crazy overnight success in an account, which, I haven't seen. So I think identifying basically these proxies of when
Mm-hmm.
an account, so whether that's, oh, an account has achieved X, we've had X many conversations with them in a certain period of time. That from our previous clients, we know that that is a very positive sign for they will convert and then, in 6 months to a
Mm.
year, and kind of working backwards of what are like these good signs that you're on the right track with the account. So,
Ah.
and I know a lot of like platforms do that. I think HubSpot have like they have a bunch of proxies and cohort analysis where they do something like, oh, like a user that takes, 7 actions within 30 minutes of opening a HubSpot account is like X times more likely to be a billing customer slash be a customer after 6 months or something. I'm totally making up the numbers, but the essence is still there. So I think almost like seeing like which are like these like potential milestones that if we can kind of be on that track and unlock them, then we will get to that long-term goal. Just so we can kind of pull everything together and show that it's like one motion heading towards a big goal. But, again, to your point, be tangible, be able to talk about that money, be able to talk about progress as well.
It's crazy what these big companies can do and like how they've developed to
Yeah.
kind of prove ROI. Final question.
Hmm.
And this was like the bonus question, I guess. Another question from our previous guest, Vasilios Kospanos, who is the EMEA and I think also APAC as well, now regional marketing
Hmm.
manager for Blood Crowd. His question was, with the upcoming kind of cookies demise, which, I think has been promised for a long, long time now, but it's coming. What's next for like intent-based platforms like Sixth Sense
Yeah.
and Demand Base?
Yeah, so I think that that's really interesting. And I'm sort of in a way, again, coming as like from the strategy angle rather than activation. I'm sort of glad that that's happening, to be honest, because I do think when intent kind of platforms or ABM tech, whatever that is, automation, all these kind of things, when they really like hit the scene, people just saw that as like, oh, now we can do ABM. You just click a button and it does ABM for you. And I think it got people lazy, it got people sort of not appreciating what you actually have to do in order to, of course, they're great tools, but that's like all they are is they are tools. You kind of need to know how to use them, how to reap the benefits. So, like intent, looking at that to potentially point you in the right direction of the type of content you should be creating, or potentially giving salespeople a heads up that, like, if you're looking at it as a heat map, there might be an opportunity there. But again,
Mm-hmm.
looking at that as a way to be like, this is what sales need to do or accounts they need to action. I think it's kind of silly because obviously the salespeople are there doing what they do best, which is selling to these accounts and kind of understanding them at a level that a platform or marketing couldn't. So in a way, I'm hoping that this maybe forces us to really look at it and say, okay, what can we actually do with this? How can we leverage it if there's patchy data, rather than kind of having seen it as like a silver bullet, um, which obviously it's not.
Yeah, that's a good point. Somewhat will probably like weave out the B or C marketers as well, like the people, like you
Hmm.
said, that are just like kind of clicking based off what they see on the screen. Um, so are these companies doomed, do you reckon? Obviously, they're big companies. I'm sure they've got a
Yeah,
bit of
I
money
don't think
behind them,
so. Because I
right?
think the whole idea behind it is, I think it's great. I think quantifying a marketing motion, which, again, talking about how do we, say closer to revenue? How do we measure effectiveness? How do we measure progress? I think these are all questions that we still struggle to answer in
Mm-hmm.
ABM. And we do ourselves a disservice sometimes being like, oh, it's a long game. It's about relationship and all these words that don't typically have numbers attached to them. So I think the fact that, these platforms have, from the beginning, sort of try to marry the qualitative and the quantitative, I think that's great because it kind of puts us in that room of like, we're now like a legitimate lever to pull. We're not just that super fluffy marketing that I think we were terrible at probably promoting in the past. That being said, I think we almost like need to backtrack a little bit to sort of be like, realistically, this is what you can do on that platform.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah.
The yeah, it's in a book called Upstart. It's a
Hmm.
really really great book, and I think they say every big company like starts as a fad, and I think
Right.
maybe the way you describe that, not, I mean, intent data, I'm personally not for it. And I think like
Yeah.
a lot of marketers are divided, but kind of like how the way you describe that, like it is that silver bullet. They think, oh, I can just do my job super easy now. Like they've grown, they've capitalized, and but yeah, I think they'll probably evolve to something else. Erika, you have been phenomenal. The
No, thank you for having
last,
me.
the last thing I'll ask is, do you
Yes,
have a question for our next
I
guest?
do. So my question is in regards to events. Because obviously we're now at a point where you still get a lot of webinar invites, but that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of been done and dusted, in my opinion. They're not differentiated. It's very hard to invite people to in-person events because what used to be you sent a really nice invite to someone's HQ. They're like spread out across the country, across the continent. And getting someone to fly to an event is, that's a big ask, especially as budget's tight. So it's sort of one, I'd be keen to hear what physical in-person events have been executed kind of well and that attendance was great. What did that look like? What's kind of too big, too small in terms of it being worthwhile someone's time, especially when people are remote? I love to kind of listen to people's experiences on that. And then it's sort of like, what's next then? If you can't get people's eyeballs on a physical invitation, on a physical event, on a digital event, how can you
Mm-hmm.
really create something that is personalized, that fundamentally grows kind of people's one-to-one connection off screen? Because I do think that's still absolutely critical in ABM, and it's just getting harder and harder and harder.
Well, I think if you describe the intent data as like the silver bullet, I think like this is the golden goose problem. Okay, great. Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think just the last thing I'll say on that, in my opinion, I think like this, like you got two ways to win. You got the big flagship events, which are obviously the
Hmm.
key critical thing for these big companies, and then also you got like the smaller in person. I think any like I would call it like medium-sized event. I think they're the ones that are like just suffering because it's not personalized enough to kind of come, is it?
Right.
And then it's not exciting enough, like big and flashy enough, to your point, to drag people to it.
Yeah.
But I
Especially, I
will
guess, for
ask,
smaller companies as well that don't have a Microsoft budget. Like,
yeah,
I have to think there's a better answer than, well, you just can't. But I haven't really, it comes up in discussions a lot with my clients, but then it sort of diffuses out because it's
mhm,
just like, again, it's too risky versus something like running a, digital marketing, putting like 5 grand behind a motion. If it doesn't work, take it off. Your, minimum commitment, it's like 50 grand for these things.
mhm.
So yeah,
I'll
that'd be great if
I
you can pitch that.
well, yeah, I'll try and find you some answers. Erica, you have been amazing. Thank you so much, and I
No,
will
thank
chat to you
you.
soon.
Yeah, have a great weekend.